In 2011, a trucker was driving down a long stretch of Highway 16 in British Columbia when he saw something strange on the side of the road. At first, he thought it was a tire, then a sleeping bag, then maybe a person. He slowed down, but before he could pull over, it was gone. He told police. They checked the area and found nothing. But the officer who filed the report, he didn't think it was a prank. He'd been working that stretch of highway for years, and he knew something most people didn't. That particular stretch between Prince George and Prince Rupert has another name. The locals call it the Highway of Tears, and for the last 50 years, that road has been swallowing people whole. It started in the late 1960s. Women began vanishing, young women, teenagers, almost all indigenous. They were last seen hitchhiking, trying to get to school, a job, a friend's house. Some were walking alone at dusk. Others were never seen again after climbing into a truck. At first, the disappearances were treated as isolated. Runaways, bad decisions, drifters. But the families knew better. They knew something or someone was hunting. It wasn't until decades later that the pattern was given a name. The Highway of Tears, a cold, remote, 700-kilometer corridor of road that cuts through the Canadian wilderness. Thick forest on either side, patchy cell service, few cameras, and a long history of silence. One of the earliest known cases was a girl in her teens. She left a friend's house late one night and never made it home. Her body was found weeks later, miles off the road, in a ditch. There were no suspects. Then it happened again, and again, and again. Over time, dozens of women vanished or were found murdered along Highway 16. Some estimates put the number as high as 80. But here's the part no one wants to say out loud. Most of these cases were barely investigated. Why? Because the victims were indigenous. For decades, families reported loved ones missing and were told they'd probably come back. Some were accused of making it up. Others were told to stop calling. One mother kept a notebook. Every call, every meeting, every promise the police made. 30 pages of notes and no answers. What makes the Highway of Tears so chilling isn't just the number of disappearances. It's the feeling of the road itself. Drivers say there are sections where your headlights don't seem to reach the trees, where time slows down, where your GPS cuts out, where you feel watched. Some truckers refuse to stop. Some say they've seen figures standing alone on the roadside, only to vanish when approached. Others tell stories of hearing voices on their radios in dead zones, or coming across roadside memorials that weren't there the day before. But the scariest part is that no one knows who did it. A few arrests have been made over the years. One man, convicted of killing a teenager in 2002, was linked to at least 2 more disappearances. Another suspect was questioned after a woman escaped his truck with bruises on her neck. But for most families, there's never been closure, just silence. Investigators admit that many of these crimes were likely the work of multiple predators over time. Serial killers, opportunists, people who knew that if they targeted certain girls in certain places, no one would come looking. One detective said it bluntly: they chose the right victims. And that's what makes this story so terrifying, because some of the killers may still be out there. In 2015, after years of pressure, Canada launched a national inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Untitled Chapter. The report called it a national crisis and pointed to decades of systemic racism, police neglect, and failure to act. They didn't just fail to solve these cases, they failed to care. Now, along Highway 16, There are signs posted every few kilometers. They show the face of a missing woman. Underneath, they read, "Don't hitchhike. Killer on the loose." There's also a new bus line, added only recently, after families demanded safer options for rural travel. But in many of the most remote areas, the ones where bodies were found, the forest is still untouched. The roadside crosses still stand, and the killers were never caught. In 1981, a man walked into a Royal Canadian Mounted Police station in British Columbia and said, "I know where the bodies are, all of them, but it's going to cost you." The officers didn't believe him, not at first. He smiled and gave them a name, then a location. Then he said, "There are 11 more, but you'll have to pay." They thought it was a sick joke. It wasn't. That man was Clifford Olson. And over the next few days, he would lead police to 11 shallow graves across the province, one by one, like a tour guide. And in exchange, the government agreed to pay him $100,000, not to him directly, but to his wife and child. It became known as the Deal with the Devil, and it would haunt Canada for decades. Clifford Olson didn't look like a monster. He wore clean shirts, combed his hair, and spoke with confidence. He called himself a businessman, but his real job was conning people, all kinds of people. By the late 1970s, he had a long criminal record: fraud, theft, impersonation. But no one thought he was dangerous, just sleazy, just annoying. Then, in the spring of 1980, something changed. Teenagers began disappearing. Young girls, then boys. Some were last seen hitchhiking. Others just vanished while walking home. Parents called the police. Flyers went up. The RCMP opened files. But no one connected the dots, not yet. At first, the disappearances were spread out. Different towns, different faces, different days. But by summer, the pattern was undeniable. All the victims were between 9 and 18. All were alone. All vanished within a few hours' drive of Vancouver. And all were last seen near roads. What no one knew at the time was that Clifford Olson had been renting cars, cruising highways, scouting bus stops, and offering rides. He told them he worked in construction, said he could help them get a job, or take them to a payphone, or just get them out of the rain. He seemed harmless, charming even, and he didn't look like what people imagined a predator looked like. But once the doors locked, it was over. By August 1981, 11 children and teens were dead. Each had been lured, attacked, and dumped in a remote location. Some buried under brush, others tossed in ditches. Then, Olson slipped. He abducted a girl in broad daylight. She escaped, told police everything. He was arrested within hours, and just like that, the killing stopped. Now here's where the story gets worse. After Olson was arrested, he told investigators that he had more to offer. He said, "I can give you closure. I can give those families peace. I'll tell you where the bodies are, but you're going to have to pay me for it." He demanded $10,000 per body to be paid into a trust fund for his wife and infant son. The total, $100,000. And unbelievably, the Canadian government agreed. Why? Because they didn't want to lose the chance to recover the victims. The families wanted answers. Some even supported the deal. Others were horrified. Olsen went on a police-guided road trip across British Columbia. He sat in the back of a cruiser, handcuffed, giving directions. They'd drive to a spot, stop on the side of the road, walk into the woods, and dig. Over 2 weeks, they found all 11 bodies, exactly where he said they'd be. When the deal went public, the country erupted. Talk radio, newspapers, parliament. People demanded to know, why did we pay a serial killer? Why did he get to buy his son's future with other people's children? But by then, it was done. The money had been transferred. And Olsen, he loved the attention. He started sending letters from prison, boasting, mocking the families, calling himself the star of Canada's justice system. At trial, he pled guilty to 11 counts of first-degree murder. He showed no remorse. He smiled through the proceedings. The judge gave him life in prison, with no parole for 25 years. The maximum sentence at the time. Even behind bars, Olsen found ways to torment. Every year, he applied for parole, knowing he'd be denied, just to make the families come back. He mailed them letters, sent interviews to the press. At one point, he even offered to reveal more victims for a price. But there were no more deals. In 2011, after 30 years in prison, Clifford Olsen died of cancer. No funeral, no headstone, no mourning, just silence. Today, his name is rarely spoken in Canada, but his legacy lingers. Because he didn't just kill children, he manipulated a system, taunted a nation, and made the government pay him to relive it. His story isn't just about evil. It's about how evil hides, how it smiles, how it shakes your hand, and then drives you into the woods. In the winter of 2002, 2 Canadian police officers stepped into a slaughterhouse on the outskirts of a pig farm just outside Vancouver. It was cold. It was quiet. It smelled like death. They followed a narrow, blood-stained hallway, past broken fridges, torn mattresses, and a mound of dirt that looked like it had been dug up and filled in again. At the end of the hall was a freezer. Inside it, they found something that even seasoned homicide detectives would later say made them physically ill. What they discovered would launch the largest forensic investigation in Canadian history. And the man responsible? He wasn't exactly hiding. In fact, he'd been throwing parties right there on the farm for years. From the late 1980s through the early 2000s, women began vanishing from Vancouver's downtown east side. These weren't random tourists or wealthy residents. These were vulnerable women. Many were Indigenous. Many were sex workers. Many struggled with addiction. Police called it a coincidence. Locals called it a pattern. Over time, the list of missing women grew. 20, then 30, then over 60. Flyers covered lampposts. Candlelight vigils were held. Families begged for help. But still, no suspects, no leads, no real effort. People started to whisper about something darker, about how the city didn't seem to care because of who these women were, and about a strange man who owned a pig farm just 30 minutes away in Port Coquitlam. To his neighbors, he was just Willie, a scruffy, awkward guy who wore overalls, didn't bathe much, and lived on a rundown pig farm with his brother. He had a high-pitched laugh, drove a beat-up truck, and walked with a limp. He was friendly, if you were on his side. But if you crossed him, he'd get weird, real weird. The farm itself was disgusting. Trash everywhere, abandoned cars, roaming pigs. People said you could smell it a mile away. And yet, that place was always busy. You see, Willie threw parties, big ones. Dozens of people would show up. Sex workers, bikers, drifters, all invited by Willie, who acted like he was hosting some twisted version of a community barbecue. There was always booze, always drugs, and always people disappearing, but no one reported it. Why would they? The cops never came out here. In early 2002, a woman, we'll call her Leah, showed up at a local hospital, bleeding heavily from a stab wound. She told staff she'd been handcuffed at a pig farm, attacked with a knife, and barely escaped. Doctors called police. This time, they actually listened. When officers arrived at the property, they didn't know what they were walking into. They thought it was an assault case. They got a warrant to search the trailer. What they found was something far, far worse. Inside the farmhouse, everything was in chaos. The walls were covered in grime. There were used syringes, a stained mattress on the floor, chains, knives, freezers. And on the farm grounds, bone fragments, teeth, shoes, hair, women's clothing. A team of forensic anthropologists was called in. Over the next year and a half, they would sift through over 200,000 DNA samples, thousands of cubic yards of soil, pig remains, and personal items. They found traces of at least 33 women. But here's where it gets worse. Some of the remains had been ground up and mixed with pig meat. That meat, police believe, had been distributed locally. The public wasn't told that part until much later. As the investigation unfolded, police placed an undercover officer in Willie's jail cell. They recorded everything, and in one chilling moment, Willie started bragging. He said, "I was gonna make it an even 50, got sloppy." He laughed, caught because of a stupid pair of handcuffs. It was the closest thing to a confession they would get, and it was enough. He was charged with 26 counts of murder. Later, the courts proceeded with just 6, enough to put him away for life. Why only 6? Because even though they had DNA evidence of dozens of women, most of the remains were too degraded to prove exactly who they were or how they died. That's how thoroughly they had been disposed of. The trial was long. The courtroom was packed with families, grieving, angry, and heartbroken. Some people had waited over a decade for answers. Others would never get them. The farm was eventually razed to the ground. The property still stands empty today, overgrown, quiet. A public inquiry later found massive failures by police, willful neglect, prejudice, and missed opportunities to stop the killings. Years earlier, they had actually visited the farm multiple times before 2002 and never followed through. In prison, Willie kept to himself. He never apologized, never admitted guilt. And then, in May of 2024, after more than 2 decades behind bars, Robert Willie Picton was attacked by another inmate in a Quebec prison. He died a few days later. He never revealed the full list of his victims. And police believe there may have been many more. To this day, the case remains one of Canada's darkest chapters. And perhaps the most haunting thing about it is that for years, a serial killer operated in plain sight, throwing parties, feeding pigs, and smiling at his guests. Right up until the moment the truth clawed its way to the surface, from the dirt beneath the pig farm. Let me tell you something most people don't like talking about. I spent 30 years flying bush planes, through some of the most godforsaken country in Canada, little ice strip airfields, backwoods lakes, gravel bars barely wide enough to land a Cessna on. If it was north of the 60th parallel, I probably landed there once. But there's one place I only flew into twice, and that was enough. We called it the Valley of the Headless Men. Real name's Nahanni Valley. It's in the Northwest Territories, way out west near the Yukon border. Mountains on every side. No roads in or out. You can hike for a week and not see another soul. It's the kind of place that stares back at you. And it has this way of making people disappear. Some say it's cursed, others say it's something else. All I know is that the valley doesn't give people back. In the year 1908, two brothers from Nova Scotia, Willie and Frank McLeod, headed into the Nahanni River Basin chasing a rumor. It was the kind of story you heard in every saloon from Dawson to Edmonton. Gold. Not just a few flakes, either. There were whispers of an old native trail that led to a hidden mine, tucked deep in the cliffs, where veins of pure gold ran like tree roots through the rock. Men who'd been there said it was guarded, cursed, that strange lights danced in the sky above it. Of course, that just made it sound more real. Willie and Frank were tough. They weren't fortune-drunk fools. Willie had worked as a trapper. Frank had done guide work up in Alaska. They were used to bad weather, hard country, and living off nothing but salt pork and black coffee for weeks. They left Fort Liard in the summer of 1908, canoed down the South Nahanni River into the heart of the valley. They took one other man with them. Some say it was a guide. Others think it was a third brother. No one ever found out, because he vanished too. A year passed, nothing. No letters, no supplies ordered, no sign of gold. The McLeods just never came back. In 1909, their cousin, Charlie McLeod, couldn't take it anymore. He set out down the same river to find out what happened. And this is where it gets strange. Charlie followed the McLeods' last known trail into a narrow canyon that locals call Dead Men Valley. A cold, windless cut through the mountains where even birds go quiet. It was there, just off the riverbank, that he found what was left of the camp. The tent was still standing. Supplies were tucked neatly into oilskin bags. Pots stacked. Rifles leaned against a spruce log. But inside the tent were two skeletons, fully clothed, lying side by side in their bedrolls. And their heads were missing. Now let me be clear. This wasn't an animal kill. I've seen what wolves and bears do. They shred you. They scatter bones. But these bodies, they were untouched. Not a scratch. Their bedrolls weren't even unzipped. No blood, no drag marks, just no heads. Charlie raced back to Fort Simpson and told the local Mounties. The Royal Northwest Mounted Police came in a month later. By then, snow had fallen. They collected the remains, took some photographs, wrote a short report that said the men had likely died of exposure, which is frankly a load of crap. You don't just lie down in your tent and freeze to death with your rifles loaded beside you. You definitely don't lose your head from hypothermia. And the heads, they were never recovered. Not downstream, not buried nearby, not stolen by animals. It was like they'd been taken, removed cleanly, and vanished. Word spread fast, as it always does in the North. Trappers started calling it the Valley of the Headless Men. Locals stopped going anywhere near that part of the river. But you know what the weirdest part is? That third man, the one who went in with them. He was never found, not alive, not dead. You'd think one creepy case would be enough to put the Nahanni on the map. But it didn't stop anyone. The legend of gold kept bringing in new suckers. And the valley kept taking them. In the year 1917, a prospector named Martin Jorgensen went in alone, claiming he'd found the source of the McLeod's mine. That spring, his cabin burned to the ground. When his remains were found in the ashes, his head was missing too. Same pattern. No known enemies, no signs of struggle. Locals say he'd started ranting before his death, talking about voices in the trees, singing at night. In the year 1945, two more men, Philip Ente and Joseph Labelle, went in with a dog team. They were found frozen solid, upright, against a tree, heads gone. By the 1950s, the Nahanni had racked up over 40 disappearances. Some bodies were never recovered. Others turned up weeks or years later, picked clean like museum skeletons. And every time, someone would say it again. The valley doesn't give them back. I'd heard the stories. Everyone in Fort Nelson had. But in 1957, I made my first trip into the Nahanni. A couple of American geologists wanted to survey the valley, claimed they were studying fault lines, but I'm sure they were looking for gold. We flew low through the canyons, dodging stone cliffs and thick clouds. The place was unreal. Quiet in a way that felt wrong. No birds, no wind. The river below was boiling in some spots, steaming like a hot spring, then freezing 100 feet downstream. I dropped them off near what they believed was the McLeod's last camp. They joked about finding skulls. One of them, Pete, I think, said, "If I find a gold nugget the size of a baby's tooth, I'm retiring in Hawaii." That was the last thing he ever said to me. I came back 5 days later. Their gear was still there. Tents zipped, backpacks full, firewood stacked. But the men, gone. Not a footprint, not a note, not even a drag mark in the moss. The RCMP brought in dogs, even tried helicopters. Nothing. It was like they'd stepped into fog and never came out. That was my last flight into the valley. Some places don't want you there. You learn to listen. Years later, in 1972, I was drinking at the Nahanni Inn in Fort Simpson when a historian from Yellowknife sat down next to me. He was digging into the McLeod story for some university paper. Said he'd gotten his hands on a private journal, allegedly written by Willie himself, recovered by a trapper in the 1920s, but never submitted to police. It wasn't long, just a few scrawled pages, but one entry made my stomach drop. October 28th, 1908. Frank says he hears her again, singing like before, but there's no sign of anyone near camp. Last night, he went out after it, rifle in hand, and came back hours later, pale as milk. Said she was walking through the trees barefoot. Asked him to follow. Voice like a girl we knew once, but different, wrong. He says she's coming back. That was the last page. No sign-off, no goodbye. Just a scratch mark where the pencil dug in too deep. The Nahanni Valley was declared a protected national park in the 1970s. But even now, access is tightly controlled. You can't just hike in. You need permits, satellite gear, survival plans. Even then, people go missing. Pilots still avoid it. Locals still warn you. And every few years, another poor bastard with a pickaxe and a dream tries to chase that old story of gold hidden in the cliffs. But I'll tell you what I believe. It wasn't the gold that brought the McLeods into that valley. It was something older, something that waits. The Dene people speak of a vanished tribe, the Naha, that used to live high in those mountains. Fierce warriors who disappeared overnight. They say the valley is where the earth split, and something came through. The legends are full of shadows and voices, of women who sing without lungs, of men who walk into the mist and come out wrong. Whatever the truth is, I don't need to know it, because I saw what was left behind. To this day, the heads of Willie and Frank McLeod have never been recovered. Their killer, if there was one, was never caught. Their gold was never found. But if you ask around up north, if you find an old pilot or a trapper with too many stories and not enough time left, you might hear it again, soft, low, almost like a warning. The valley doesn't give them back.